Hi guys, how you doing? It's Dawn from Let's Make a Mess today. Well, this is probably going to be my final kit tonight, I think. I'm not sure. But if it's not, I'm not going to film the other two because the other two that I'm working on are another Christmas and another floral. But this one is different. This is going to be a vintage. And so there's a lot of vintage ephemera and stuff in this one, and I haven't done one like this before. So I thought, well, I better show it. So let's just dig in. Okay, so for this one, I picked out quite a bit of good stuff, I think. So let's start with what's going to be like on the cover, and then we'll look at the paper, and then we'll look at the ephemera. So for the cover, I love this vintage. I don't know what it is. It's like a quilting or something. I don't know what it is, but I thought it was beautiful. There's enough to do. Again, 2 small or 1 large. But besides that, I couldn't make up my mind, so I went ahead and put in this. This is vintage. It's not. This doesn't just look vintage. I think it actually is vintage because I did pick this up at a thrift store and they said it was vintage. So they told me that. I'm telling you that. So I hope that's true. It sure is pretty. It's nice and thick. Again, you can do 2 small, like 2 small or 1 large. So I'm putting enough for 4 actual covers in here, but depending on how big you make them, you can get more. So there's some cover ideas for the cover, and then for the front of it, I thought this would look really pretty on this one. You know, I know it blends in, but I thought you guys can work some magic, put some lace on it. It would actually look pretty on here as well. So that's kind of what I put this on. Oh, and this has got a sticky, but go ahead and make sure that you glue it. Or sew it, whatever you want to do. So there's that. And so then I added some actual vintage lace material in here, some different bits and bobs. And like, isn't this beautiful? This little delicate one. I thought this was pretty, so I added that. And then there's this one. So I added some lace in this one because, you know, you have to have lace if you're going to go vintage, right? And then some old eyelet material for, you know, whatever you want to use that for. You could cut that up and make some paper clips out of that if you'd like. That would be a good idea. And I actually added some squares, vintage squares that I had, and a vintage linen napkin that is really gorgeous. It's very well worn. It's really beautiful. So I just wanted to add that. It's got good color, and then some more material for for your paper clips or whatever. And then because I have had this forever, it's actually a vintage Barbie doll dress that somebody actually made. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to add this to that vintage so that you can just have that. And then that would be cute on a page. I don't know. I thought it would be cute. Okay, so that's the cover and the material. Let's move this off to the side. And let's take a look at some of the paper that I added here. Okay, so do you guys remember, if you watch my videos, you remember a long time ago that I found this stuff about Linda Lowell, and she was in the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, so she was an actress. This is her Leeds shoe store in, I don't know what year, it doesn't say what year, but Los Angeles, and this is, I don't know what year this is either, but it's in LA. She was like a actress, just kind of an actress, and so there was a lot of this ephemera that I found of hers, and here's when she was 1 year old. I don't have the heart to cut that up, but I thought I'd add her things in here. Isn't this beautiful? Happy birthday to a dear niece, and that's Linda's as well. And it talks about how she must be doing so great in Hollywood and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought that was super cool. So some of Linda's ephemera, but to go with that is also, this is an actual radio interview script that was in her stuff. So yeah, so there's that ephemera. I thought that was really cute. A lot of this is very vintage. Some of it looks vintage. I'm going to tell you what is vintage and what is just looks vintage. This is vintage. And here's some vintage, there's no date on them, but you can tell by the color that they're vintage. vintage postcards. Now these just look vintage. These are just some pictures I thought I would throw in here that looked really pretty. Tea time, whatnot. Those just look vintage, but these are vintage. This is like an old Fresca ad. Remember Fresca? And just some an old advertisement from way back. Doesn't have a date on it, but we know that that's old. Oh, look, it has Thousand Oaks. Oh, wow, member service in a Capitol Record Club, Thousand Oaks, California. I wonder if that's still here. Probably not. So those are vintage. Here's some vintage hymns and some vintage TV guide and another vintage. And then here's a vintage dictionary. And then here's some pictures that I pulled out of a vintage Mary Had a Little Lamb book that I just thought was adorable. And then here's some vintage paper that it's very vintage. I mean, and it's really thick and it's yummy. And these were given to me from somebody at work, and they're actual vintage covers to some markers. And I just loved them. And I said, you know what, I have to have those. And so I put them in my vintage box. So I've kind of saved those myself. And then some vintage music and some vintage pattern paper, probably out of some kind of little book. And here's some flowers that look vintage but are not. That's not vintage. These are vintage, but they're in Asian, but they're vintage. And this is like from 1949, so this is for real. And here is the Los Angeles paper. It's the Los Angeles 1965. It's pretty vintage, you guys. It's really, really cool. So, yeah, I think that's really awesome. So I added that in there. Ooh. May. Convincing clothes ties that planning. Oh, those are cool. Isn't that cool? Look at that hair. Sassy. And this is from a vintage little magazine that I found. Here's a vintage something or other. Okay, these guys, you have to be really careful with. This is a vintage tax return form, and it's like super vintage, so be very delicate with that. Here's some vintage advertising. Here's another bit of that magazine that is vintage. Here's some vintage Christmas stickers. I know it is Christmas time, so I thought I'd throw those in the vintage. Okay, now this is just the paper. So those are all the real vintage. Now here's just some extra paper that I wanted to add to the for your journal to make your pages, just because they're pretty. Let's see something. Okay, yeah, this one. Everybody loves this book. Here's some vintage cars. Here's some vintage images that I thought would look really cool. Here's some Asian paper. Here's some Liberace stuff. Here's some vintage dishes. This is vintage images of dressers, a nightstand, vintage product. You know, just some real pretty paper. And some math piece. You know, you have to have all this regular stuff to put your journals together. You have to have these pieces. Here's just some pretty pictures of some ladies. And a ladies' home journal ad. I don't know if that's really that old. Oh, this is fun. So I went through my wallpaper and I found some classic looking, it's called Walt Disney Signature, and it's supposed to look like classic wallpaper from the day. So I thought I'd add that. So there's some wallpaper. And then for scrap paper, I went ahead and added just your regular vintage looking scrap pieces. Okay? So there's that. Now let's look at the ephemera and the lace. Okay, so we have some actual vintage lace that came from my friend's mom. We have lots and lots of that. Lots and lots and lots, so that'll be good. And then I thought this was beautiful. Isn't that pretty? Just love that, so I wanted to throw that in there. Just love it. And then I made a couple of paper clips for you with lace and that brown material or that tannish material, so I thought those were pretty. Vintagey looking. And then here's some coffee dyed. They have a little sparkle on them, some doilies and a heart doily. And then I tried to pick out some vintage looking napkins, but that's kind of hard to do. But she looks vintage. She says, you say crazy cat lady like it's a bad thing. So that's cool. Somebody gifted those to me. And then some vintage roses. Aren't those beautiful? So there's your doilies and your napkins for your journal. All right, now we have the ephemera. Okay, so what I did was I gave you lots and lots and lots of Tim Holtz dolls. And a couple more fell down in there somewhere maybe. Oh, a little dog. A little dog. So the Tim Holtz people. And then the Tim Holtz, what are these called? Aren't these called Tim Holtz ancestors or something like that? So there's those pictures. Those are cool. And these are those real vintage, sometimes I put so much stuff in here, I start looking at it, I go, God, it's not going to fit in my envelope. I do. But I just, I have a lot of stuff, as you can tell, and this feels really good because it's just good for everybody. These are actual 1970s material, so those are vintage as well. And I added, obviously, some nice blings for your leisure. And then as far as ephemera, I just picked through Happiness is Still Homemade, thanks. Some just some vintagey looking ephemera so that you can add it, make, you know, for journaling and tags and, you know, decoration. So these are great for journal cards right here, perfect for journaling. Little tags to add, make journals, and then some, this is an equipment, and then some more of these little vintage cards, that, you know, they're the Tim Holtz cards. And beautiful little journal cards there. Little vintage stamp. Threw that in there, and some statement sheets, and a tag that somebody gifted me that I thought was lovely, and I shared that with you, and a time card, some vintage keys, a vintage picture, and a vintage simplicity. I might just put some of these things in there. How's that? That would save some. Yeah, that's kind of cool, huh? There we go. Let's do that. So there you go. So you'll have some things in there. So that's the vintage one, and I hope you enjoy the vintage one. I can make some more vintage ones soon, but not right now. I'm gonna go ahead and cut that off of there, so it fits in here nicely with everything else. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. This kit. This was a fun one. I hadn't done one like this before, so this was a lot of fun. So again, I hope you enjoyed it, and we're almost done with all of this kit stuff for the day. I've been busy. I'm trying to keep up, you know, because I want to do it until I can't do it anymore. Okay, thanks guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye now.